Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we are literally going behind the scenes of psychological research to uncover exactly how human behavior is studied. Look, we all have our own gut intuitions about why people do what they do, right? But psychology demands a whole lot more than just guesswork. It demands rigorous empirical science. So we're going to explore the entire architecture of psychological discovery, starting from that very first spark of an idea, all the way to a published world-changing finding.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the foundations of psychological science, move into formulating the research blueprint, cover the ethics of research, break down the three major research designs, and finally, look at ensuring scientific validity.
Section 1. Foundations of Psychological Science.
So it's super important to establish right out of the gate that psychology isn't just common sense or, casual people watching. It's a highly rigorous science that relies on systematically collecting and analyzing data to separate fact from fiction. At the very foundation of all this, we've got two main pillars: basic research and applied research. Basic research asks those fundamental why questions, like why do our nerves conduct impulses, or how exactly does practice affect our memory? It's all about acquiring knowledge just for the sake of knowledge. Applied research, on the other hand, asks how. How can we use that knowledge to actually solve real-world problems? And what's really amazing is how these two constantly feed into each other. For example, one scientist might do basic research on the mechanics of human memory. Then another scientist takes those fundamental discoveries and applies them to create a totally new, highly effective way to help kids learn how to read. They are literally two halves of the exact same scientific engine.
Section 2. Formulating the research blueprint. So, to formulate a solid plan, we have to take these massive, abstract ideas about behavior and narrow them down into specific data points we can actually test. Think of this process kind of like walking down a staircase. At the very top, you have laws. These are highly general principles that apply to pretty much all situations, though honestly, they're pretty rare in psychology. Stepping down a tier, we find theories. A theory is this integrated set of principles that explains and predicts a bunch of observed relationships. But a theory is usually way too broad to test all at once. So we step down one more tier to the research hypothesis. This is a highly specific, totally falsifiable prediction about how two or more variables relate to each other. And this right here, this is the exact target we're going to test in the lab.
But how do we actually test those hypotheses? I mean, you can't just put an abstract concept under a microscope, right? We have to take these broad conceptual variables, things like psychotherapy or anxiety, and lock them down into concrete measured variables. We do this using what's called an operational definition. So for example, the conceptual variable of psychotherapy becomes the measured variable of the exact number of hours a patient has spent in psychotherapy. Anxiety simply becomes the number of anxiety concerns a patient self-reports. Basically, we translate the invisible into the strictly measurable.
Let's look at another one. Consider a really complex conceptual variable like depression. A researcher might operationalize this by actually counting the number of negative words a participant uses when writing a creative story, or maybe by tracking the number of appointments they make with the therapist. Now, you might be wondering, why does this insane level of specificity even matter? Well, it entirely removes ambiguity. By defining exactly how a variable is measured, scientists anywhere else in the world can perfectly replicate the study in their own labs to see if those findings actually hold up.
Section 3. The Ethics of Research.
Now hold up, before we can collect even a single drop of data, we have to pass through a totally critical checkpoint. In psychology, we're dealing with living, breathing humans and animals, meaning their well-being is our absolute top priority. Ethics in science isn't just some boring bureaucratic red tape. It is the essential protective shielding of the entire field. Every single proposed study has to undergo a rigorous cost-benefit analysis to make sure the potential benefits to society outweigh any possible costs or stress to the participants. In the US, this is strictly regulated by the IRB, or the Institutional Review Board. They're basically the gatekeepers who have to approve every procedure before a researcher can even think about starting.
And the IRB has some pretty strict system requirements, so to speak. First, researchers absolutely must guarantee free choice. Participants can walk away from the study at any time, totally penalty-free. Second, we have to protect their privacy, which often means keeping your data completely anonymous. Third is acquiring informed consent, making sure people actually know their rights and what they're signing up for. Fourth, if the researchers have to use a little deception to get a genuine reaction, it has to be strictly limited and heavily justified. And finally, every single participant has to get a full debriefing afterward where the true purpose of the study is explained. At the end of the day, preventing harm is absolutely paramount.
Section 4. 3 major research designs.
All right. With our ethical shields up and running, we can finally open the scientific toolbox. Psychologists basically rely on 3 distinct methods to extract truth from data, and each one has its own specific goals and limitations. We've got descriptive research for taking a snapshot of things as they are, correlational research for assessing relationships, and experimental research for figuring out causal impact. Each of these has awesome advantages, but also some pretty major disadvantages that dictate exactly when and why a researcher would use them.
Let's start with descriptive research. This includes things like deep dive case studies on unique individuals, massive wide-scale surveys, or just naturalistic observations where researchers quietly watch behavior as it naturally happens. Descriptive research is phenomenal for setting the baseline. It gives us those vital starting statistics, like how prevalent a certain disorder is in a population. But keep in mind, it's just a static picture. It doesn't tell us how variables relate to each other at all, and it definitely doesn't tell us why something is happening.
For that, we step over to a correlational design, where we actually measure the relationship between variables. Basically, a predictor variable and an outcome variable are linked, meaning they move together. A super classic example is height and weight. Generally speaking, as height goes up, weight tends to go up too. Correlational research is just fantastic for making predictions in everyday life, especially when we can't easily or ethically run a full-blown experiment.
But, and this is a huge flashing red warning light here, correlation does not equal causation. Honestly, if you only take one thing away from this whole explainer for your everyday life, make it this. Just because 2 things happen together or are linked absolutely does not mean that one caused the other. Like, did you know there is a massively strong correlation between ice cream sales and shark attacks? So did the ice cream cause the shark attacks? Of course not. The common causal variable there is just the summer heat. The heat drives people to both eat more ice cream and swim in the ocean more often. To actually prove that one thing causes another, we're going to need a much heavier tool.
And that tool is the experimental design. In an experiment, the relationship between variables isn't just a link, it's proven as a straight, direct path. This is the ultimate superpower of the experimental method. It actually proves that changing one variable directly causes a change in another. To pull this off, experiments rely on manipulating 2 very specific variables. First is the independent variable. This is the causing variable. It's the thing the researcher actively creates, controls, or messes around with. Then we have the dependent variable, which is the outcome. This is what the researcher measures at the end to see if their manipulation actually did anything. By holding literally everything else in the room constant and only tweaking that independent variable, the researcher can finally establish that holy grail of science, a direct causal link.
Section 5. Ensuring scientific validity.
Okay, so we ran our experiment, the data looks good, but we aren't done yet. Before any of this data is accepted as actual scientific fact, it has to run the gauntlet. Before it gets anywhere near a published journal, the study must pass 4 vital validity checks. First up, construct validity. Did we actually measure what we thought we were measuring? Second, statistical conclusion validity. We have to rely on hardcore math here to ensure the findings aren't just random lucky flukes. Third, internal validity. Can we truly trust the causal relationship we found without worrying that some other hidden variable interfered? And finally, external validity, which asks the big picture question. Can we actually generalize these lab results to other people and real-world situations out there? Passing all these checks means the science is undeniably solid.
Which brings us to the end of our mission today. But it leaves you with a pretty huge question to ponder. Next time you're scrolling through your newsfeed and you see some crazy viral headline claiming a groundbreaking new psychological fact, what are you going to do? Will you just blindly accept it, or are you going to use your brand new empirical toolkit to ask, wait, was this study descriptive, correlational, or experimental? Did they actually prove causality, or is it just a correlation dressed up as a fact? You now have the exact blueprint to understand the science of behavior. Use it well. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep asking the right questions.